week's episode of Gangsta. The backstories of Warwick and Nicolas are slowly being revealed, and there's a brand new killer in town by the name of Doug, and he's getting ready to have a badass sword fight with Nicolas. Is it just me, or did this week's episode just fly right by? This is one of those episodes that felt like it passed by in about 5 minutes, and that's probably because it was a pretty good one. There was a lot of really great things going for this episode. First, let's talk about the backstory of Warwick, who is, of course, Warwick Archangelo. He came from this very rich family. He always had these different bodyguards, and there was this one point in time when he was appointed a new bodyguard, who was, of course, Nicolas. Now, at first, these two characters didn't really seem to like each other, or more, it was Warwick who didn't really like Nicolas. Nicolas, he was just at work doing his job. The thing is, Warwick did not like the fact that Nicolas could never talk back to him. He could never really be an effective bodyguard because he could never really truly communicate with him. And little by little throughout the episode, intercut between the action scenes and the actual story that's going on in the present day, you get to see these scenes of the two characters hanging out, interacting with each other while Warwick is still studying, who apparently seems like he's pretty sharp. We also get to learn a little bit more about the Twilight Soldiers in this week's episode, mostly just a little more information that's trickling in. We get to learn, of course, that they are experimental soldiers who are taking this special drug which enhances their abilities. And that's actually going to come into play in this week's episode. The main story is at the very beginning, there's this one district warehouse where all of these people have been killed, sliced and diced and mutilated. And because of this, the police immediately think that, of course, it's Nicolas, because he's the only guy walking around in town with a freaking samurai sword strapped to him. But that's not the case. Apparently there is another Twilight who is doing this, who goes by the name of Doug. Not the most intimidating name in the world, but I have to say that Doug seems like he's an interesting character, because at first glance, he looks like a little kid, just a little kid with dreadlocks, and he actually uses his appearance to trick the gangsters and kill them in this week's episode in a flurry of blood and sword slashes. He's actually going after that one big mobster by the name of Danny Monroe, who actually hires the Benria, or the handyman, to come and help him out, and this is essentially all a big build-up to the battle between Doug and Nicolas. Now, what's most interesting is right before they battle, he actually pulls out his dog tag, and we get to reveal what his name is, but apparently he's also a very high-ranking dog tag. He's an A0, just like Nicolas. So safe to say this is going to be one hell of an intense battle. And even though Nicolas and Doug are the true star Twilights of this week's episode, we also get to learn that Danny Monroe's right-hand man, Delico, is also a dog tag. And this makes sense. He seems like he's going to be an important character. They do focus on him in the intro of the show, and I figured he would probably have a pretty important role. Although he is a lower ranking, he seems to be a D-rank Twilight. However, he still has the skills to pay the bills, especially when it comes to using his gun and defending his boss. Even when he's attacked, he doesn't even flinch. Especially during that scene where suddenly Doug the little kid just shows up walking out of the alley and then just starts decapitating people left and right. I also really love that one scene where you had the snipers who were watching the entire time and you could actually see the massacre through the scope of the sniper rifle. I thought that was a really clever shot. Another scene that I really loved from this week's episode was one with Alex, who is a very minor character in this week's episode. At the very beginning, she starts to have these creepy visions of her old boss, Barry, who literally is like a zombified dead version of himself who's constantly bleeding and basically haunting her from the grave. She starts getting these visions when she imagines that she's going to leave the Benria, and that's because she's heard a lot of rumors about this one girl by the name of Veronica who actually used to work for them. And apparently things did not work out too well for Veronica, so Alex decides maybe it's a good idea to probably get out of here. But then again, this is probably the best job that she's ever had, or at least maybe the safest, and she's definitely got two of the most badass bodyguards that she could be working with. But I'm really intrigued to see how her story is actually going to tie into everything that's going on now, because the entire backstory of Warwick and Nicolas is really intriguing, especially because in last week's episode, it almost seemed like Nicolas was the one who killed all of Warwick's family, and there's probably going to be a bigger explanation behind this. It might even be the fact that Warwick really didn't even care about his family. He might have just been reacting to the fact that he did just see his parents killed, and just the entire shock of it is what's so amazing for him. But we're going to have to learn a little bit more about that, because despite everything that happened in their past, Warwick and Nicolas seem to have a really good relationship in the present, and I really can't wait to see that unfold in next week's episode when we get that big badass battle between Nicolas and Doug. I don't know if he's actually going to finish him off. Maybe they'll actually recruit him into the ranks, and who's this guy even working for? What I will say is, I love the fact that he actually uses different weapons that we've seen in the show. He has these, like, 2 short machete blades, which he uses to just slice and dice everyone this week. This is a pretty violent episode of the series, so, you know, viewers be warned. Otherwise, this was a pretty exciting episode of Gangsta. So what's the rundown on this week's episode? Like I said, this episode just flew right by. Like, as soon as the episode ended with Nicolas and Doug getting ready to confront each other, boom, the end credits kicked in, and I honestly just reared back. I was so angry. I was really ready for that fight. But honestly, this was a really good build-up. And there were a lot of really cool characters this week, and they're really establishing the fact that even though Warwick and Nicolas are sort of seen as like the big badasses of the series, a lot of these guys can hold their own. Like, I already mentioned Delico, who apparently is a lower-level Twilight, but even his boss, Danny Monroe, is known as something of a gunslinger. And there's a scene this week where Doug actually jumps right in front of him, and he just immediately is able to shoot him. It's pretty freaking impressive. There's also a little bit of lighthearted humor at the very beginning of the episode, where when they find out about these murders, you get to see that Detective Chad and Claude are actually questioning both Nicolas and Warwick. And Nicolas and Warwick just totally give Claude the business. Like, they never, ever give him any straight answers, and they just mess with him because he's the rookie. And then, of course, there's Detective Chad, who apparently has had some sort of involvement in Warwick's life for quite some time. He was there, apparently, when his family died, and he's always been sort of looking out for him. So in many ways, he's kind of like that old uncle. He's kind of like that one family member that he can go to. And despite the fact that they do butt heads a lot of the time, they seem to have a little bit of respect for each other, and I think that's another really interesting dynamic. It actually makes me care about this guy a little bit more, and just the fact that he's working with all of these inner people in the city. It's really, really crazy. Otherwise, this was just a really good episode, which was a really nice build-up to a big fight. Little bit of information coming in from the backstory and the nice mystery of this brand new Doug character, who is definitely someone not to be trifled with because he is an A0 Twilight. On the technical side of things, this week's episode looked okay, just like the rest of the series. I wish they would put a little more attention maybe into the artwork, and some of the animation shots looked alright. Maybe they're saving the action budget for some later episodes. Otherwise, everything still looks pretty good. It's still just a very grounded, realistic anime series, which I actually do appreciate because I watch a lot of weird freaking shows, so it's kind of nice to see something which, despite the fact that it still does have like its anime stylings and like over-the-topness, it still manages to ground itself a little bit, which makes a lot of the characters a lot more relatable than your typical anime series. And as I've said before, I still love the soundtrack, I still love the opening, and I still think that this is a pretty compelling anime series that anybody who is a fan of mafia movies or action anime should definitely check out. So, I'm going to give this week's episode right here a 4 out of 5. A really awesome build-up, lots of great character introductions, new backstories, and all types of intrigue. This was a pretty gangsta episode of Gangsta. So check it out, guys. I liked it. So, did you watch this week's episode of Gangsta? Did you have a favorite scene from this week's episode? What do you think really happened in the backstory between Warwick and Nicolas? Do you think Nicolas actually betrayed him and killed the family? Do you think he was actually tricked into doing this? Or do you think that there is another twist to the series that we don't quite know yet? And what do you hope to see in the battle between Nicolas and Doug? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching my review. Make sure to like it, share it with all of your friends, and make sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can see all of our latest anime and manga reviews. And you can also check out our weekly podcast show, The Powerful Nerdcast, which is now up on iTunes. Make sure to also check out the iTunes link in the description box below. We would really appreciate it if you guys could give us a good rating and maybe even write out a small review. You don't have to, but we would really appreciate it if you did. So thank you guys again for watching, and as always, stay dandy, baby.